Do I just click it?
Yeah, just click the... Yeah,
No, it's
nice.
Wait, let me see if I have my charisma. Yeah, I got it. It's like an exchange of goods. Right?
The fuck this isn't the point I'm trying to make.
I'm here for war, G!
Hello everyone, welcome to the land of... What land is this? The land of magical things. The question we're talking about today is, can non-Europeans think? It's the title of a book by Hamid Dabashi, who is an Iranian philosopher, who wrote the book in 2015, and I think is still a very relevant question today. When you look at general commodity production, right? Most of the raw materials, say for example lithium, there's an abundance in Afghanistan and Chile.
Right.
Coltan from the Congo.
Right.
Oil, yes, yeah. Saudi, Iran. Yet the commodities that are produced, the apples, the NASA spacecrafts and whatnot, are dependent upon these materials. Right. So you have these two kind of groups in academia in general. It's called global north countries and global south countries, right? Now this is all, most of our audiences know this.
Yeah.
But what is more important for our discussion today is that this is not simply a matter of production, consumption, resource extraction. What happens to the intellectual realm as a result of this? What happens to the production of knowledge? What happens to the production of thought on this basis? Right? Is it still the case that whatever knowledge is produced is almost mined from these various countries for the benefit of those dominant countries?
Right.
Or is there a potential of knowledge production from outside that realm? World War I, it was the oil from Iran and Saudi that meant that Britain could stop using coal for its ships.
Right.
And when it stopped using coal for its ships, it meant that there was no smoke that was coming out, which meant that the tracing techniques of the opposing armies wouldn't be able to trace it because of the fact that there's no smoke.
Right.
So in a similar way, you extract knowledge, you extract something like anthropology, ethnomusicology. You extract information for all of these various places on Earth for the benefit and service of the dominant power structures that exist. From this kind of conundrum, two groups emerge. Right. And these two groups are mostly present amongst the diaspora. One we'll call Group A, and the other one we'll call Group B.
Right.
Group A say it's over. It's finished.
Right.
The West has won the war on the mind, basically. Philosophy, knowledge production, and everything that comes with empire, essentially, is here to stay.
Right.
And that the best thing that the diaspora can do is simply reinterpret this knowledge for their respective audience.
Like copy and paste almost.
Literally copy and paste.
Right.
Interpret through language and contextualize in a way that they'll understand.
Group B?
Group B says that actually, since thinkers like Fanon and Edward Said, there's been a trend of decolonizing thought, which says that while at some point European philosophers spoke to us from a top-down position, they are gonna have to start understanding that now is the time to speak side by side.
Like equals?
Like equals.
Right.
That,
what is that equality based on? Can I quickly ask?
That the production of thoughts from anywhere in the world is
Equal
as
value?
valid.
Equal value.
Equal value, right? Is as valid as knowledge that comes from Europe.
Right.
And these two are constantly in conflict. And it is this tension that I'm hoping that we can discuss today.
Okay, that's very cool. I want to just make one point, because obviously my channel is about history, so some of my fans would probably be annoyed at me if I didn't. Oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia in 1930s, so it's not possible for the British to have relied. You're absolutely right about Iranian oil, them relying on it. It's not really that big of an issue, but I have OCD, so I felt like I had to say that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that small little point. But in terms of Group A and Group B, let's get down to the crux of it. I have a huge problem with Group A. Like, not even on a philosophical level. I think before we even talk about like philosophy, I think we need to talk about why do you think like that? Because is it fair to say that Group A is pessimistic?
Absolutely.
But why are you pessimistic? But that no. This is the thing. I don't know. Maybe in my head, I just conflate the word pessimism with defeatism. But if in my head is if I do it wrong in my head, it's fair to say that those two words are very similar, right? Like being pessimistic and having some sort of a defeatist outlook. There are correlations, a lot of heavy crossover between the two, right?
Sure, and that comes with the idea of Group A that says the West is one.
No, but
it's already admitting defeat.
Exactly, but that's a problem, though. Not even on a philosophical level, which I feel like I'm just sabotaging this whole discussion. But beyond the philosophy, beyond having some sort of a discourse about these deep issues, why are you pessimistic? What has happened in your life for you to be pessimistic about things?
The pessimism of Group A comes from this idea that historical contingencies, things that can change in history. So, for example, when feudal kings ruled, there was this idea that their rulership is ordained by God.
God's lieutenant.
God's lieutenant. And if you're ideologically embedded within that framework, a revolution's impossible. Of course, that changed, right? It moved on into the capitalist realm.
Right.
So that's the kind of hope that many have for change, is that historically impossible situations become possibilities very easily.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
This is an argument that Group B make. That currently, or for the past 400 years, there's been an insistence that the correct way to think is within this Western framework. And then if you're outside of that, you're considered irrational, you're considered unthinking, you're considered unphilosophical. Primitive. Perfect, right? And it's actually the West's aim to civilize, to enlighten.
White man's
burden, right? Yeah. Now there's this point where it says, no, there's a pushback against it.
Okay.
What Group A is pessimistic about, and again, we're talking about defeatism or pessimism, the example I would use is almost as if you're in a warlike situation.
Sure.
And that being optimistic in a warlike situation can be a bit detrimental, because you're telling people it's fine, we can defeat the other through these mechanisms, through decolonizing, through post-colonial theories, deconstruction. All of these various theories can come forth and legitimize themselves against the Western philosophers who delegitimize them. Right? Yeah. Now, there's this amazing parable. I really like this. It's the fight between the sun and wind.
Okay.
Right? So the sun and the wind are chilling. And there's a man walking with a jacket, and the wind goes, "Psst, I bet you I can make him take his jacket off better than you can."
Yeah.
And the sun goes, "Okay, you're on. Please go ahead." And the wind begins blowing in every direction, just violently trying to get the jacket off. What does the guy do? He clings on. Clings on to the jacket, and you're walking through. And the sun goes, "My turn." Gives him love. Radiates him. Heat. Warmth. The guy takes his jacket off with a smile on his face. Right? And Group A's and both, the beef was over who can take the jacket off. So both, they were after the same thing. They were after the accomplishment of control of that particular citizen in one particular realm. The pessimism of Group A comes from this particular aspect, that throughout time, there's the consistency of empire throughout time is changing to the point that today the technologies of politics that are occurring are far more sophisticated, far more able to govern than previous generations, to the point where even the critique, the post-colonial critique of Western knowledge becomes part of Western knowledge itself.
Right.
This is the pessimism that Group A speaks of.
Right.
It's almost like the critique of it, it's like a software. And the criticisms coming from various decolonial movements, they aim at showing the bugs of the software. The engineer comes, fixes the bugs.
Right.
So critique as a point of self-creation is a very, very powerful tool of Western philosophy, especially today. This is the argument that Group A make, and this is where their pessimism comes from.
Right. I understand that, and that's a pretty good point, actually, considering, like, especially what you said about how technologies allow them to be able to just disseminate their power even better, and at the same time the ability to absorb self-critique, almost in a self-correcting type of way.
Yes.
Like literally like technology. But like I want to go back to the analogy of war, right? Like I am not blind to the fact that if we just for a second, for argument's sake, divide them into these two monolithic blocks of, say, like the West, maybe the East or the Islamic world, or the global North and global South, right? I'm not blind to the fact that the West is in a dominant position materially, technologically, militarily, in every sense. Like you would have to be crazy not to accept that. Sure. But I still push back on what you said about being hopeless in war.
By the way, this isn't my perspective. Okay. I'm just to add a caveat. Okay. I don't represent Group A. I'm just putting forth their argumentation of pessimism.
That's my bad. I should have said Group A. But the problem with that kind of outlook is, like, for you to imagine that the West has just won. Do you know how ridiculous? Do you know how, like deluded of an outlook that is? How defeatist of an outlook that is? Imagine we hop in a time machine and we go back to like 1550 Constantinople, where the Ottomans, they're literally referring to the Habsburg emperors who control half of Europe, most of America, and the Ottomans refused to see them as an equal sovereign. It's like, I'm above you, you're below me. That's the only way we're going to correspond. So in that time period, someone's obviously going to say, oh yeah, the Ottomans have won. Like, what about the Romans? Geez, like Louise, the Romans, you go back to like 100 AD or like, I don't know, like 10, 20 AD where Augustus is ruling. Of course they've won everything. Could somebody in that time period imagine a future where there is no Romans? Probably not, but that's a ridiculous statement to make, because ultimately that viewpoint, it's rested on two great cardinal sins in my head. And I don't mean cardinal sins in like a religious manner. It's defeatism and hubris. And when you combine those two, you create a very, like, just not a very fertile space in your mind to come at things from a healthy manner. It's this hubris of, like, the time period we're at right now, this is the way things are going to be. Why? What has happened in human history for you to come to that realization? Right. It's like being between a rock and a hard place, but you still have to be hopeful.
Yes.
Because it's that hope in the first place is the only thing that's going to let you get out of it. Now, can being hopeful in the midst of a war zone be detrimental? Absolutely. I go outside, everything is nice and sunny, and then a bomb drops, I die. That's obviously not good. But like, that urge has to be within you, and it's that urge of hopefulness that will defeat the defeatism within you. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, being hopeful, it's not a choice. Like, you shouldn't like get to choose if you're hopeful or not. Like, you have to be hopeful.
Yes, absolutely.
Just even from a strategic point of view.
And on top of that is that a lot of these thinkers are members of the diaspora.
Right.
In certain situations, it's easy to look at a situation and feel hopeless because you're not in the situation.
Right. Yeah, because you can't really do much.
One of the most dangerous aspects of Group A is a reinforcement of the white man's burden.
There you go. I was going to say that. That's beautiful. I was going to say that a little bit later. You're just absorbing these imperialist tropes of like, Europe's already won. Like, all you're doing is you're just reinforcing what they're saying. You're echoing what they're saying.
Yes, it's exactly. It's almost as if it's like a self-colonizing kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's even more dangerous because you've accepted it rather than someone from outside telling you.
Right. And this is this kind of harks in on a lot of imperialist narratives, because the imperialists can use you for its own means. And this is one of the main issues that Group B have with any intellectual who talks about these particular issues. Someone like Sam Harris, for example.
I'm actually very similar to that.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah.
Individuals who very conveniently post 9/11, during the Iraq War, were perpetuating this idea as being kind of atheistic in an intellectual sense, but being very adamant that Islam is especially a problem.
You know,
in one of Sam Harris's articles, is why don't I criticize Israel? His main point in that article is that Muslims take Islam more seriously than Jews take Judaism.
Wait, say that again.
His point is that Muslims, so his point is that books that are founded on Judaism are equally as violent as a lot of Islamic scripture.
Right.
But his point is that because Muslims take Islam more seriously than Jews take Judaism, that's the particular problem of it, right? Which again, the narrative plays into the hands of this kind of human interventionism. That we are going to go there and we're going to save these savages from themselves, from their own irrationalities and whatnot. Right. This is the massive political issue I have with Group B, with Group A, which Group B also has, which is that you're playing into a lot of the games that imperialists are playing, and justifying it for the good of the people themselves.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, one thing that almost like triggers me when people say, like when people talk about the epistemological superiority of the West over the East, I understand that that's a very broad concept, but one thing that I always looked at and I thought, like, I can easily push back on this supposed superiority is when, say for example, Europeans go over to the Islamic world and they study the Muslims, or say Iranians or Afghans or Arabs, and when you just see what they write about and how frequently it's incorrect and the degree to which it's incorrect, it's shameful, it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? But that in and of itself should give you hope that all is not lost, that the Europeans haven't won, because that presupposed superiority complex, say imperialism, I don't want to say Europeans have, but like imperialism instills in you, that is a maladaptive thing. That's not a good thing. You shouldn't look at that and go, damn, they have one, haven't they? You should look at that and go, oh wow, they're gonna fall, like they're gonna burn their fingers, and they have numerous times throughout history. Every time I'm from Afghanistan. Every time a European state, America being an extension of Afghanistan, has gone in and intervened in Afghanistan, there has been massive drawback for the British first, then the Soviets, and then the Americans. And a key reason, I would actually argue, the number one reason, to be honest with you, it's not geography, it's not the warlike mentality of Afghans, it's the lack of knowledge they had about Afghans. Do you see what I'm saying? And you can, slightly more emotionally, you can extend that and go and talk about, oh, they have less respect for them as well. But let's just try to stay civil for a second. It's just about knowledge. It's the lack of knowledge. Dude, when America first invaded Afghanistan in the early 2000s, 2002, 2003, you know what American soldiers were doing? So in Afghanistan, you have something called the parda, which is the curtain, but it's philosophically the divide between man and woman, right? My wife, especially in the tribal areas, another man is not really supposed to like see her / interact with her, right? American soldiers be doing night raids, kick in the door and just go into the rooms and into the houses and just point guns and shout at the women and the men indiscriminately without understanding, oh my God, if I shout at that guy's wife and I see her being not properly dressed, etc., whatever, and he sees that, he is going to be venomously angry, and he might do something. Join the Taliban, for instance. They're
not aware of the fact that has repercussions.
Good. See, that's ignorance, right? Because if you say this to somebody who's not necessarily an Afghan, they might look at that and go, why is that such a big deal for an Afghan? And I guess we can talk about that as well, but I think that's a different issue. For them, it is. Like, that is enough for a man to go to the Taliban and go, hey, I want to join you guys because these guys disrespected me. Post, I don't know the exact year, but let's say 2008, they didn't do that. Every time they were going to raid a house, unless it's like a Navy SEALs special operation, they would knock on the door and say, just put the women in one part of the house and we're going to check out the men.
But that is That is Group A's point.
That they can adapt?
Adaptation. So
Right.
this is exactly the point. Is that on the one hand, you have this understanding of a soldier going in having no idea and no understanding of the cultural values within that space. So what happens?
They learn.
They learn based off of what? Either individuals, anthropologists, sociologists who study the culture, and again, going back to resource extraction, information extraction about a particular culture. For what use? For military intervention.
Yeah.
Right? So the use of cultural understandings in order to better themselves is weaponized.
I understand your point about that feeding into the argument of Group A, because technically you're kind of using capitalism. But again, with all due respect, that's not that special of an idea, because what is knowledge in the first place? If you go throughout history, right? So you have, say for instance, this is a very broad and basic kind of depiction of historical knowledge. But you had the Romans, you had the ancient Greeks, you had the Romans who built on the ancient Greeks, and then you had the Arabs that built on that. You had the Persians that came and helped the Arabs, and then the Persians used a bunch of stuff from India. I'm sure that the Indians used a bunch of stuff from China. Of course there's going to be a dissemination of knowledge, and ultimately, if we're coming at it from a very political scientist type of view, you just need to weaponize things, ideas that will work for you and improve your situation. And the fact that there is such a big difference of power between, say, the West and the East means that the East have less room to kind of pick and choose. Like, if something works, use that.
Sure, and but that comes, I guess that comes in knowledge of certain technologies, for example. So even groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, I hope we don't get demonetized for this, but they have to know how to hack. They have to know how to use social media. Yeah. They have to know these particular techniques, right? Of war, right? The internet, all of these various things are things that they have to adapt to, otherwise they stand no chance. Right. But there's the other aspect of when you say, well, what is knowledge? And you talk about the communication of knowledge across different lands. What happens when a particular empire, a particular group says we know, and others are wrong? So their form of knowledge is less valuable. Right. And this is one of the things that Group B try and do, is say that actually a lot of the ways in which Group A think are based on Western rationalities. Right. There's a Palestinian filmmaker by the last name Suleiman, and he has and this is what Hamid Dabashi speaks about in his book as an example, is he's driving in Palestine and he's eating a fig. And when the fig's finished, there's a seed, there's a little pit that's left, and he chucks the pit out the window and it hits an Israeli tank. And he's driving along, and then boom, the Israeli tank explodes. Because of the fig. Because of the fig. That's a magical fig. Right. That's an important point. It's a magical fig. But in the scene, the actor's just driving. Right. Oblivious to what just happened. Oh, okay. Right? Yeah, and it's a kind of like a cheeky, comedic kind of aspect to it, right? Yeah. One of the interpolations that comes from that is that there's a lot of irrationality within the claim to rationality. So what is rational, for example, about a terrorist state such as Israel occupying land and calling the inhabitants terrorists? Illogical, right? Yet the pose of rationality, the pose of being, this is the moral, intellectual, ideological outlook that is correct, is the comedic bit. That's actually comedic. Yet it is posed to us as non-comedic. It's posed to us as rationality. And Group B is saying, actually, there's a lot of things within art, within poetry, within a lot of these forms of knowledge production and dissemination that may seem ludicrous to someone that doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
But within that context, it's very understandable.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But ultimately, I feel like, man, that comes down to power again. Just
knowledge and power, right?
Just straight up power. Like the Romans used to have this. They kind of they were trailblazers in this regard, where if they wanted to go to war with somebody, they would need to find a reason, and obviously you would want to have the moral high ground, right? So they would literally not necessarily stage false flag operations, but they would just find a random excuse and say, you attacked us first. That person is looking at that and going, what are you talking about? You guys attacked us. And then they go and then they just destroy. But again, that comes down to power. And the reason why I think Group A's argument is not great is that power changes like all the time. The pendulum swings. It takes, and one of the reasons I think a lot of people fall into the trap of Group A, and it's very understandable, it's very human, is that we only have a set lifetime. Like if I'm lucky, I'm going to be 78 apparently. Inshallah wa ta'ala, before I die, right? But these pendulum swings take place, sometimes they take place less, but a lot of the times slightly longer than that, or more than that, like hundreds of years, right? But they do take place. Like you don't need a history expert to tell you that. So have it, again, this is why the whole defeatist pessimistic thing I'm so at odds with is, like, it's not grounded in logic, it's not grounded in history, it's not grounded in reality. You know what I mean? Like,
do you know what they would push back on that?
Go.
Their pushback on this would be to say
the technology and things are different now.
How pervasive they are, right? The very fact that, for example, many of the Middle East speak English due to shows like How I Met Your Mother and Friends. Right. That is massive.
No, that's
right.
Humongous. That's
you're
humongous.
Not only disseminating a particular cultural aspect, you're teaching what it is to be what it is to be someone's partner.
Yeah.
What it means to be a friend.
Right.
What kind of arguments, what kind of things do people get into arguments about? How do you and who do you have sex with?
No.
These things and the amount of
how big of an impact that has, you're saying, on a society?
Exactly. How the impact of
it goes to the roots, you're saying.
To the roots, to the point of point A, which is that we shouldn't see this cultural dissemination and this historical trajectory of philosophical thought as being just another instance in history. That it is unique.
Right.
And the pervasive element of cultural capital that the West has is so embedded in everything that we do, that it's a very new moment, essentially, with new capabilities.
It's quite tough to push back on that. That's absolutely true, and the role of technology is paramount in that. But again, I would say the same thing. It comes down to power. For instance, like what you said about how these shows, that was a great point, by the way, these shows, they change the way that, say, a person in Syria would look at what it means to be a partner in a relationship, How I Met Your Mother or something like that. But again, power is the crucial point here, because if a country has power to be able to express itself, it can pick and choose. It can say that is against our cultural value, interest, whatever. So then we're going to go down a different path. Like you're already seeing that with that show Ertuğrul. You know that Turkish one? It's based on like the 1200s, the grandfather of the guy who found the Ottoman Empire. But it is humongous, dude. Throughout Turkey, Pakistan, India, loads of the Arab world, etc. But again, once countries start having more power, they will be able to assert themselves and say, no, this is against our cultural values. Just look at China. China has so much power that it is able to literally, I think, edit Hollywood movies that go against certain, not even values, it's the values of the CCP, like rebelliousness.
But that is the argument that Group A make, is that the very fact that there's any censorship already is very interesting, right?
In China?
Anywhere.
Okay.
Anywhere that censors particular aspects. First of all, people are always curious to know what was censored.
Yeah.
Right, what's behind the curtain?
Yeah,
what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And when the West puts itself as this kind of hegemon of free thought, free freedom of expression, free ideas, that kind of realm, it becomes that aspect of its power structure is something that Group A says is unique in a sense that it tells you to critique it, and its criticisms make it more powerful.
Right. Okay.
You see, this is the point that Group A make to Point B, is that all your PhD researchers on decolonial thought are funded by these institutions. Right. You become the next step in philosophical thought, in the trajectory, right? So, and again, you build on this, right? There's modernity, post-modernity, structuralism, post-structuralism. It builds on itself. It's a constantly self-critiquing intelligence, right? So when you have a particular aspect that says actually there's outer forces that can challenge this particular rationality, it's like, fantastic, come. Conferences. We'll create exhibitions within museums. You'll come, you'll talk, we'll put your artwork everywhere, and at the end of it, it's a reinforcement of those particular insights. It seems as though it's a critique. It's funded as though it's a critique. But A's point to Group B is that what you guys are doing, all the information that you're disseminating, all of these things that you're writing are actually in the service of Western powers.
Why would everything that they would be writing, say for instance there's somebody who's like an Islamist thinker, right, like a Salafi thinker, and rejects a bunch of Western values and whatnot, is that still in service according to Group A?
So that's a very interesting question. This is one of the, I guess, limits, and this is what a lot of Marxist thinkers are very insistent upon, which is that you're able to critique anything, but as soon as you implement or push for economic change, there's a line that's drawn.
From the Western perspective?
Yes.
Okay.
Right, Jeremy Corbyn, for example, right? Suddenly there's a figure who's saying X, Y, Z. Every newspaper outlet begins calling him a vampire. Because he's going to take your children away. He's the boogeyman. Bernie Sanders, right? Anything that's deemed as challenging, there's going to be a line. And you go, you can critique this. And this is the zone we've created for your critique. But as soon as the economic realms kind of push that, there's a question.
Again, it's like, I feel like that kind of feeds into what I was saying about the power. I feel like power is obviously a very multifaceted thing. It relies on military knowledge production and everything. But I feel like economics, at least in this day and age where you can fight different types of asymmetric warfare and whatnot, economics is the base of it. So that's what I'm saying. My point about if you see certain countries outside of the typical first world or the G8 country, G20 countries that start becoming more and more economically prosperous, they will flex their muscles more as well. Like for instance, what I was thinking about was like, I think it's this year. This year, the World Cup. It's going to be in Qatar. So I'm not under FIFA, fair play, but I don't think, the point I was trying to make, I don't think you're allowed to drink
I don't think
in the stadiums. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, we have the economic capital. You're coming here, fair play, it's under FIFA, but you're coming here to our country, therefore you have to respect our rules. You know what I mean? And you started seeing major boxing events being hosted in Saudi Arabia as well. You're going to see way more of those as well. So, but like that's what I would use to counter.
Don't you think a lot of the partnerships with Saudi and Qatar come from certain deals with the West that end up benefiting Western powers, particularly in the military sense?
Absolutely.
Right.
No, absolutely.
That we're seeing the surface of with this FIFA stuff.
No, absolutely. And that's a great point you made. But that point, sometimes when people talk about it, it has the potential to trigger me as well, because I feel like people lump that piece of information, which is absolutely correct, that there is a crossover of interests, to just say, oh, the Saudi royal family is a puppet of the West. Are they? Are they really? I mean, historically, if you look at it, you can make a great argument that they're not. They've done loads of things that are against Western interests. Just for instance, the nationalization of the oil industry. Oil discovered, I think, 1938. From mid-1950s, let's just say, to mid-1970s, Saudi Arabia went from owning, I think, 50% of the revenue coming from oil that they split with Aramco, the American company, to in 1975, I think it was 74, they bought all of it out.
How does it strengthen, in your opinion, does it strengthen Group B's argument in the intellectual realm? That in terms of decolonizing and producing alternative forms of rationality and thought.
Absolutely.
This is the start that...
Absolutely, because you guys have to remember, right? Even if you look at it historically, it is very rare, and I am obsessed with those time periods in history where there is warfare, there isn't economic prosperity, but yet you have an abundance of philosophers and just intellectual thought. That's very rare, hence why I'm obsessed with it. Most of the time, what
give us an example.
I will give you an example. To be fair, most of the time when it happens, it's like the kind of intellectual arts is to do with poetry. And those
right, no. Sure.
Poetry, but like
but that's a fantastic point, right? Is that the kind of to write poetry? If you wrote like an entire poetry book and said this is philosophy, you'd get laughed at, right? Because it's seen as too flowery and not too artsy and not rigorous enough. And this is one of the rejections.
Yeah.
That happens is that you have art here, and you have philosophy here. Right. Art, poetry, it's the realm of imagination. It's the realm of hope. Right. Yeah. Philosophy, you philosophize on quote unquote serious matters. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm not making this minor distinction. No, I'm just saying that that's one of the issues that that Group B keeps making, is that this distinction is a false dichotomy. That actually
distinction between poetry and philosophy.
Yes, that as you said, in war times, these narratives that people are creating and these works that they're creating is an expression of the contexts that they're within.
Absolutely.
And this is knowledge production. They're spreading a message to...
have you read that Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish? Of course. Dude, that guy talks about very deep stuff. Ridiculously deep stuff, right? And obviously Palestine hasn't been going through a great time in the last 70 years. But my point is that knowledge production is directly correlated, and if I was to do it in my sequential way that my brain works, it comes after economic prosperity. So if you just look at the Islamic Golden Age, that happened in a time where the Abbasid Khilafah was on top. Yes. And then when the Abbasids started decaying, people started moving to places like Nishapur, Tus, Esfahan, and places like that, where there was more political stability and the rulers there were more stronger. Sure. But I'm saying, like, the reason I keep going back to the whole economic prosperity and power thing is that once that happens, the intellectual knowledge production will just follow. It's as a result, it will just come about. And that kind of confidence that you saw Europe portray in the 17, 18 and 1900s of their own epistemological superiority is directly, not even correlated, it's damn near dependent on their economic prosperity.
So, therefore, would you say that even our discussion is predicated on economics, and that actually we shouldn't be asking the question, can non-Europeans think? It's just that what is considered thought becomes relevant once there's an economic base. Absolutely. To support that the ideas that are coming out of it.
Absolutely. I'm going to speak from my heart for a second, guys. I'm not trying to disrespect no one yet, but honestly, that question, can non-Europeans think? It's damn right disrespectful.
Yeah. He talked. Let me just put Hamid Dabashi, who wrote the title. Yeah. He acknowledges this. Like, it's not meant to be an action. It's a rhetorical question.
Okay, good, but yeah, all right, fine. But still, it's like, what do you mean? Can non-Europeans think? Of course, they can think. And even in the time, say the last 150 years, there's been a dominance. If we just talk about the Islamic world, there's been a dominance of Europe over the Islamic world. There have still been plenty of thinkers where if you read their work, you're like, wow, it will blow you away. By a European standard, you might not necessarily think that, but that's not a reflection of European superiority. That's, if anything, not to get too confrontational, that's a reflection of European arrogance. Sure. You know what I mean? Yeah. And arrogance, I hope we can all agree, is not a good thing, and eventually you will see the bad consequences of arrogance. So that question is like, of course, I hope it is a rhetorical question.
Yeah, no. So Hamid Dabashi isn't, the book isn't predicated on like cognitive skills or anything. Yeah.
Because think about it, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to do a video soon in a couple of months on Ataturk. Like Ataturk is a great example, all right? And you can in some ways track Tariq's political / philosophical outlook on how he felt about Ataturk. So in my early 20s, I'm in my late 20s. In my early 20s, I looked at Ataturk and I thought, wow, fanboy. Like I wanted to get posters of him on my bed. You ask me now, and I can definitely see positives, but if I have major criticisms and bones of contention with him. But see, he's a very interesting guy because what he saw was the Europeans dominating materially the Islamic world, and in order to become strong, I have to become like the European in terms of dress, in terms of even modernity, exactly, everything modernity, language, dress, everything, right? But I mean, you're kind of seeing that a little bit now, where there's a pushback in Turkish society, where more and more segments of Turkish society, I'm not saying I disagree or agree with Erdogan, are expressing themselves to say, no, I kind of want to express a little bit more of the Islamic side of my heritage. That feels a little bit more natural. Do you see what I'm saying? So just because you're following somebody who at that point in time is winning, not just in a military sense, but in a knowledge production sense as well, that's not necessarily a good thing you're doing. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure. And this brings us on to the next kind of aspect of it, is mainly because we're talking about the Middle East. When we're talking about can non-Europeans think and kind of like Group A and Group B, these groups, from my experience, are founded within the Middle Eastern region.
Me too.
Right?
Me too, yeah,
I haven't had conversations like this outside of that realm. The question of Islam comes in.
Go.
Right? Which you asked, would there still be tolerance for Islamism within British media, for example? Right? And one of the things that I wanted to point to in the Who Speaks for Islam video that I did was how it is possible to constantly portray aspects of a conservative Muslim versus the more secular Muslim.
Right.
And to put these contrasts on the BBC, for example, sit back and absorb the tension,
right,
and say that we put these guys on board.
The BBC did.
The BBC, right? That we're neutral. Of course does. So the question that comes here in Ataturk in Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood is there a threat that by separating Islam and secularism, we're creating the West versus Islam binary, which actually really helps imperialist thought?
That sounds like a very saucy question. Can you repeat it? I want to think.
Sure. So, like end of ideology, end of history narrative that Fukuyama wrote after the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? I think that was 1989. 1992, Samuel Huntington wrote Clash of Civilizations, right? So the Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union is down, new enemy, right? Before it was capitalism, communism, now what's the new enemy? It's Islamism, it's Islam, right? That's going to threaten the Western world. And then when 9/11 happened, it was like a gift to this guy, just to exemplify the point that he was making.
Right.
And of course, this narrative is constantly pushed within Western media, that there is this unruly, hijab-wearing, voodooing entity out here that is against our...
Didn't George Bush mention the word crusade after 9/11?
Yes, absolutely.
That is insane. Why didn't no one... What's your point? What was your question exactly?
So the question is that by separating out these particular groups as Muslims versus the secularists, are we not falling back into this binary between Islam versus the West?
I think that's a solid point.
You know what I'm saying? Because we can't let power define what a Muslim is.
That's very nice. That's a very good point, man. And I really don't think I can push back too much on that. When I did my master's, the best thing that I learned about my master's, because up until that point, I had been largely learning in the British education system about European, non-Islamic world stuff, right? So for my master's and then PhD, it's Islamic world stuff. Dude, in my master's, the thing that I took away the most is the degree of tolerance that existed, specifically in the Middle East, like the Levant area, because that's where we were studying, was, dude, it was incredible.
Absolutely.
And it was so nice to learn that at that time period, because it was like 2015, 2016 times, where you're talking about in the media, these tropes
Islam
is intolerant, right?
Yeah.
And dude, the whole time I was learning it, I was just blown away about the degree of tolerance that existed in that area. To be fair, it wasn't to a modern person, if I explained what that tolerance looked like, they will probably look at that and go, are you sure that's tolerance? That sounds really, really bad, right? But if you contextualize it within that time period. And what you said is such a pertinent point, and I want to rant a little bit about this, is that it comes down to power and economics. And the quicker that, say the Middle East, get more power, the less damage that can be done by some of these philosophical conflicts. Because I understand that, say, creating binary lines between Islam versus secular is bad. I agree with that. I'm not even trying to be devil's advocate here. But at the same time, I know that in order to win some sort of philosophical or even an actual real conflict, you need to rely upon those things.
I disagree completely with
No, like, from the perspective of winning, like if you want to win, you need to create some sort of an other that you can fight against. And in order to do that, you need to look at things that they have which are different to yours.
That's a different point. That's a different point. What I'm talking about within a Middle Eastern country. Right? So within a Middle Eastern country, the binary only helps two people, in my opinion. It only helps the Islamists.
Right.
Because they also see if you come up against them.
Right.
And you say, actually, I'm a Muslim, but I don't agree with this, that, and the other that you're saying.
Yeah.
You're deemed a sellout and a secularist.
Right.
In the West, the solidified or fossilized character of the Muslim has to be the same as what the Muslim Brotherhood's imagination is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Of the West.
Of Muslims.
Why does it have to be the same fossilized? I don't follow that part.
So, you have with the image of a Muslim, right? The West perception of the Muslim
is the Muslims enact that.
Yes.
Okay.
And the Muslim Brotherhood view of the Muslim is basically the same.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I get that. Yeah.
And you're fossilizing what it means to be a Muslim in this particular instance. Whereas actually the reality of it
is different.
In very, very much the same way as the empires, as you mentioned, the diversity
is crazy.
Is still here today.
Absolutely.
There are mystics. There are all of these various sects and forms of thinking even within those sects.
Let me just clarify a little bit. I meant that if you are in the midst of a war, of a fight, it's almost like it becomes an imperative for you to act in that way, right? I'm not saying that
it draws lines.
I'm not saying that that's a good thing. It's just unfortunately it's kind of necessary when you're in the midst of a fight, which is why I keep saying figure out the economic and the power discrepancy, so then you can start living normal lives and have a much more nuanced outlook, which history has shown much of the Middle East to have in the first place. You see what I'm saying? Like for instance, and this was another thing that annoys me about the whole epistemological superiority of the West, is like, because it's wrong. Because think about the nation-state model, right? You have the nation-state model, which it's slightly different argument, but you could say it works for Europe or for whatever reason, right? But in much of the Islamic world, it doesn't work. How do you want, say for instance, a nation-state model like Lebanon, with the political system that they inherited from the French, to not end up in some sort of a conflict
where you draw lines that would not drawn with your pen?
Exactly, yeah. And this was the really cool thing that I learned about the medieval Middle East. And maybe you can push back and say, in modernity you need to have more clarity and things are a little bit more developed, is that a lot of these tolerance was encapsulated within a space of basically unwritten rules. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
Just they weren't necessarily put down into pen and paper and into a legal code or anything of that nature. It's just people had an unwritten understanding of there's going to be cooperation regardless of if you're Kurdish, Assyrian, Yazidi, whatever you are. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's only when
that all this was removed and a particular administrative, bureaucratic lawmaking apparatus was put forth.
Absolutely.
Stripped away a lot of these nuances.
Exactly. And even just to take a slight step backwards, historically speaking, it's when Europe showed up in the Islamic world in an antagonistic form, and it seemed self-evident, that there would be a clash, a military clash, and then subsequently a clash of knowledge and culture and all of these other things. So again, man, all of this just comes down to how much power you're able to wield, how much confidence you can exert as a result of having that power, and put your foot down and say, you guys look at Islamist ideology, for instance, this is just devil's advocacy, Islamist ideology as like backward and primitive. I have the power to defend myself and say, no, this is what I want. Like the fact that you can't do that because
Sure, but that also assumes that Islamism is the only way to unify.
That was just like an example, but you can use like loads of other examples, I guess, as well.
This guy is a much nicer character than what he appears on camera. This is a show for the peepdom out there.
Listen, I have a very direct way of talking, but there is no malevolence in what I say. When there is malevolence, when I am being condescending, I will say that. But that is very rare because I was raised pretty well.
You were raised pretty well.
Yeah, no, I was raised very well, yeah.
Do we want to give any message, any shout-outs?
Can I shout out a couple of my videos that might be of interest, that are coming out to thingy? So listen, I'm going to make a video on the Crusades. Was it a clash of civilization? Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Then I'm also going to talk about Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, and why his thinking was so much more sophisticated than you might learn about on Wikipedia or something. And then how Iran became Shia. It's got nothing to do with this video, but it's a solid topic. But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I really appreciated this, man. Thank you.
No, absolute pleasure, man.
This was awesome.
Pleasure. We should do it again sometime.
We should do it. Yeah. But that time it's got to be on my channel or something.
Yeah. We'll equalize somehow.
We'll do it. Can they really?
I think so.
I thought that was the incredible thing about hyenas. That their
bony.
No, that their digestion system literally has the capacity to be able to
digest
bones.
Can we do that?
Absolutely not. Don't try.
What? You can't eat bone?
Bones? Are you crazy?
No, I always see people like just cracking bones.
No, I do that, but I don't.
That's the marrow.
That's the marrow and the stuff in the inside.
Have
I can't.
For bants, you should just take that. Just a little chicken wing and just.
Nah, man, you'll die of internal bleeding, man. What are you talking about?